A person cannot yield their time.
That's right. You can decline to speak, though, and let others speak.
Okay.
Already signed.
Okay. 1 minute. As our clerk is getting ready, the first three are Mary Campbell, Laura Dick, and Quincy Cummings.
Mayor, first we need to call this, have a motion to go back.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Okay, but those will be the... can we have a motion to come back into open session?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt, second by Alderwoman Howman. And when Madam Clerk comes back, she can call the roll. We didn't. We have. That's just going to have to be postponed.
Oh, I thought Jeff said to do it here.
I don't think. Jeff, you didn't expect us to do closed session minutes here. That would be. Okay. 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 And again, just to clarify for everyone, the council, of course, this is a presentation and discussion. The council is taking no action this evening on this issue. Yeah. Okay. Again, the first three would be Mary Campbell, Laura Dick, and Quincy Cummings.
First we need to vote on the motion to go back into session.
Oh, that's right. We have Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second to come back into executive session. That one does need to have a roll call, and actually we can, if you will just go ahead and vote, we agree to come back into executive session or regular session. Motion carries 9-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk, and so now we're going to begin at 6:12 our public comment. Mary.
Thank you. I'm Mary Campbell, co-founder of Labyrinth Outreach Services to Women, YWCA Labyrinth. I come with a slightly different issue than I think the others will talk about. My concern is the issue of whether an individual who in their past has a felony on their record and is not eligible to participate in this review board. Having worked with Labyrinth for 3 years, renovating, restoring, with the help of city council money, but all of the work was done by volunteers. Those volunteers, many of whom had felonies in their background. They would not tell me that initially. They are our building trades people. They are our business owners. They have their private businesses. They are people that you and I know, but you don't know that they have a felony back 20, 30 years ago. And they only would begin to share that with me as we tore down plaster and ripped out walls. They feel disenfranchised. These are members of our community. They are not felons. They are individuals who 20 or 30 or 15 or whatever years ago made a mistake, and because they didn't have the support, many of whom it was related to alcohol or an addiction. We all understand now what those issues do to people. So I'm asking for you to consider them as individuals on their own merit, not their history. They have changed their lives, and they want to contribute, and they deserve the respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Laura Dick, Quincy Cummings, and Elizabeth Kuba.
Thank you. Again, my name is Laura Dick. I live on the 800 block of West Washington Street in Bloomington. I've lived there for many years. I love my neighborhood. I love the diversity. I do have concerns about police activity in my neighborhood and the negative attitudes that many police officers have about my neighborhood and the people who live there. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. Today I want to speak as a resident of the wider city of Bloomington. In 2015, 36% of unarmed people killed by police were African American. They only made up 13% of the population. And in the same year, although African American and Hispanic individuals only made up 32% of the population, they accounted for 56% of all incarcerated. Those statistics are only worsening. Please, as educated, caring people, let us consider that we have a problem with systemic racism in the criminal justice system from top to bottom. We cannot wait and wait and wait to take action. I don't want to argue whether our police force has a problem with systemic racism. At this point in time, people are so defensive that that type of conversation will lead nowhere and will limit us in what kind of actions we can take. Instead, I want to advocate that our city be proactive in putting into place systems that will help us deal with systemic racism. In 1997, Bloomington Normal was nationally hailed as a model community for not in our town. In 2017, can't we again be hailed as a model city in addressing systemic racism? A civilian review board, a CRB, is one tool that assists us to protect against systemic racism. Its existence in a community does not prove that the community's police force is racist. What it does prove is that the community cares about racism and wants to take steps to protect against it. One responsible step, again, is to make certain that all citizens feel safe and comfortable in filing a complaint against public servants who wield enormous power. And make no mistake, police officers wield enormous power against our citizens. Police officers as public servants should be used to and accepting of oversight and review, and that's all essentially that a CRB will hopefully do. Is that so very controversial? Do we have to wait and wait and wait for you as a public body, as public servants, to take action? Please help us be a model for the rest of the communities in the state of Illinois. Thank you.
Quincy Cummings, Elizabeth Kuba, and Nancy Marciniak.
Good evening. I'm Quincy Cummings. I'm the president of the Bloomington Normal NAACP. And on behalf of several of the organizations advocating for the establishment of a civilian review board, we thank you for the work you've done on this issue and for producing the draft ordinance for the Public Safety and Community Relations Board, or PSCRB, that was included in the June 19th Committee of the Whole meeting packet. Many representatives of our organizations were present at that meeting and were pleased to hear that the majority of the City Council expressed support for the ordinance. At this meeting, we also heard several proposals for revisions suggested by City Council members, which included adding language to emphasize relationship building, addressing addressing problematic language in the ordinance, developing means by which council members can have more involvement in board appointments, and a suggestion that rules for this board should be cleared through the council before being adopted by PSCRB. As an alliance, we are supportive of all these revisions. We also heard discussions on Section 3C, which currently bars people with felonies from participating on the proposed PSCRB. We were pleasantly surprised to hear a compromise position offered by Councilmember Bray, which will allow people with felonies to serve on the board so as long as 7 years have passed since their conviction. Our alliance of community groups is supportive of this compromise position. We made our position clear. We support the PSCRB, and as a matter of conscience, we requested that those with prior felonies be eligible for consideration as potential board members. If you feel such persons are unworthy of service or that you support the compromise position, so may it be. At the conclusion of the meeting, we were disappointed to hear the vote on the PSCRB would be delayed, but understood that the council members needed more time to consider the latest revisions. We did not hear any council member object to a vote taking place at the July 10th City Council meeting. We walked away from the Committee of the Whole meeting after hearing our elected representatives publicly state support for this effort with the sense that the council had addressed any outstanding issues with the ordinance and would come to the table ready to take the first step towards establishing a mechanism of transparency and accountability for our community on July 10th. Recent actions by council members belie that understanding. The rationale for requesting Chief Hefner to reiterate his community outreach and education efforts as well as the complaint submission process is unclear. Nonetheless, we hope that his presentation clarifies any outstanding issues you may have and that you will be ready to vote at the next City Council meeting on July 24th. Again, we thank you for your work thus far, and we encourage you to take action on July 24th to pass the proposed ordinance establishing the PSCRB. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Kuba, Nancy Marciniak, and Brianna Williams.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kuba. I brought my family here in 2006. I moved from Pekin, which is not a diverse community. I specifically looked for a diverse community, and I chose Bloomington. I love our city. I think the police have a great opportunity to step forward and make our community better. Police are here to protect and serve, and I feel the police have this great opportunity to help our community be together so we can help break up the divide of the hate and the racism. We can start at a local level. And that's basically why I'm here. It's like, I love our city. I want us to be a city all together.
Thank you. Nancy Marciniak and Brianna Williams and Olivia Butts.
I'm Nancy Marciniak. I live in Bloomington. I want to comment on the draft ordinance for Citizens Advisory Board. At the June 19th discussions, this item 3C was brought forward as the elephant in the room. There seemed to be general consensus that it was possible for a former felon to undergo change and become a better citizen. I agree. It was suggested that perhaps only violent crimes should be permanently disqualifying factors. I'm not familiar with all the legal classifications of felonies, so I don't know exactly where the line might be drawn, but it seems reasonable to draw some sort of line. It was also suggested that a period of time without further convictions be required. This also seems reasonable, especially since a convicted felon has a number of obstacles to overcome in order to stabilize his or her personal situation. Gainful employment is high on the list, as it is for everyone else. However, as it was alluded to on the 19th, satisfying the requirements of even an amended 3C would still not demonstrate an affirmative qualification for this board. So item 3A becomes the overriding consideration. There are probably lots of people who have never broken a law and yet are not well suited for potentially sensitive positions or interactions. Here's what I consider the real elephant in the room. It's the us versus them mindset which pervades almost every aspect of our society. That's the thing we are really trying to fix. We are sometimes very good at fixing what ain't broke, but so far we are behind at fixing the infrastructure of that mindset. Sound familiar? Finally, item 8F attempts to deal with bullies and intimidation. But here's the thing. In the nitty-gritty world of us versus them, the bullies can be on all sides. And the bullies think they are the good guys, only protecting themselves, their friends and family, their ideas, their loop. And just like a police department, they know how to work undercover and anonymously. They know how to put a little English on the intimidation. And sometimes the difference between a good guy and a bully is just a little spin. Thank you.
Brianna Williams, Olivia Butts, and Colleen Stern. And are you Colleen? No, Brianna. Oh, you're not speaking. Okay. Olivia Butts, Colleen Stern, and Brianna Bartlett.
Hi there. My name's Olivia, and I am a Bloomington resident living in Ward 5. I'm here tonight to express my disappointment in the council prolonging the vote on the PSCRB, and also disappointment in questioning the benefits of the PSCRB to this community. My time living in both Bloomington and Normal has been really great. I went to school at ISU, and now I actually work there. I personally have never had a bad interaction with the police in Bloomington or in Normal. I'm not here for myself, though. I'm not here because I have a personal story to share or because I have personally been wronged by the police. I'm here for my friends, my neighbors, my community members who have told me their stories. I have listened time and time again to the stories of residents who are afraid to call the police, where being pulled over on their way to work is a weekly occurrence, where cars are searched for no reason. I listened to them and I empathized and I decided I couldn't live in this community without trying to affect some type of change. That was my original reason for joining Black Lives Matter. Tonight you will hear personal stories of how people have had bad interactions with BPD. You will hear stories of how the complaint process went wrong. And if you cannot empathize with those stories, if you cannot put yourselves in the shoes of those people, then I ask you to look at the data. Data that most of you have seen before. I've seen your faces around. I've seen a lot of you who went to the Stevenson Center presentation, right? Black people are 4 times more likely than white people to be stopped and frisked in Bloomington. Black people are twice as likely to be pulled over in traffic. In Bloomington specifically, white drivers have a 6% chance of having a search conducted, while black drivers have a 13% chance. This is not a perception problem. The problem is real, and it is expressed by these community members. And like I mentioned, if you don't want to listen to those stories, if you can't empathize with that, then the data is clear, and it is in front of you. Here's the thing. These facts, these stories, they've been shared with BPD, and like I said, many of you have heard them before, and yet no changes have been made. I understand, though. I get it. You probably haven't had a harsh experience with law enforcement, and either have I. So for us, it's easy living here, right? But at whose expense? One of you said that, quote, we already have a citizens review board. It's called the City Council. If you really believe that, then why haven't there been any changes? You know the problem, and we're ready for a solution.
Colleen Stern, Brianna Bartlett, and Colleen Lucky. Colleen Stern. Okay, Brianna Bartlett. Brianna Bartlett. Colleen Lucky. And following Colleen, we'll have Barbara Hale and Colleen Lucky. I have you down twice. Cinnamon Porter. Okay. So Colleen?
Thank you. My name's Colleen Lucky. I live at 205 South McLean Street. I live in Bloomington. I work in Bloomington. I went to school here, and I have a vested interest in the way people in this community are treated. I joined Black Lives Matter because I saw the inequitable treatment of people of color present in this community. I heard stories of people, including children, who have been profiled. I could not allow myself to be a bystander to this happening in this place that I call home. I'm on the west side often, and I regularly see black and brown people pulled over, and seemingly within minutes there are 2 or 3 cop cars on the scene. And this has not once happened to me when I've been pulled over. Mr. Mayor, I know you asked for new points to be brought up tonight, but that's the point, that you have all heard this before multiple times. You've heard the data, you've heard testimony, and there are some of you that still want to call this a perception issue. I know those who have had negative interactions with the police and have not filed complaints because they don't trust the police and they don't trust the complaint process. While the current pro-social events that the BPD currently engage in are commendable ways to maintain relationships with people who do trust the police enough to come out to those events, no amount of cookies or ice cream or coffee will build trust in people who do not trust the police and won't show up to those events. This PSCRB is a clear way to address mistrust in the policing system and repair the relationship between the police department and the community they're charged to serve. I'm disappointed in the council members who petitioned to delay this vote and the seemingly decreased lack of urgency on this PSCRB. Again, you have heard the facts and data multiple times in this room. You have dedicated hours to listening to folks talk about this. You have heard the chief of police describe what the department is currently doing in terms of community policing and the current complaint process multiple times before in this room. You have heard testimony from your own constituents on what they've experienced and why they did not file a complaint. This is urgent because the lives and well-being of the people you serve as a city council depend on it. You must acknowledge that there's a problem with policing policies in the city and that a small number of complaints per year points to an even bigger problem, that people do not trust the current system and don't trust that it's designed to work for them, and they therefore do not use it. Although you did not create this problem, you are now responsible for acknowledging it and proposing solutions. You've been presented with a problem, and this PSCRB is a solution, and I urge you to delay the vote no further. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Yale, Cinnamon Porter, and Dante Latson.
I actually would like to, my name is Barbara Heil. I live in Bloomington. I've lived here since the late 1960s. Very fond of this community. And I'm glad for the work that the council has done and that the community organizations have brought forward for you to consider. I too am disappointed that it hasn't come for a vote tonight, but glad that you have plans to do it in the coming session. I'm here to support the review board, as you can imagine, but I'm here mostly to reiterate that this is an opportunity for transparency. Transparency is a difficult thing to pull off. It takes a lot of work. It means that if somebody has a complaint that they can bring it, and the circumstances will not be handled out on the street in the dark the way the original event might have taken place, but instead can be reviewed over time with both sides presenting what occurred and everybody being heard. That process is what can build trust. This is a chance for this opportunity, this community to move in that direction, and it's an important step to take, and I hope you will take it at your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Cinnamon Porter, Dante Latson, and Jean Howard, and I think that might be it.
My name is Cinnamon Porter, and I support the passage of the Public Safety and Community Relations Board with the amendment to allow folks with felony convictions to serve. My heart cannot stand to hear another story about someone I know being mistreated by the Bloomington Police Department. I know community members who would not show up tonight or at previous meetings to express their support of the PSCRB because of the sole presence of the Bloomington Police Department officers, and that's intimidating for them. I have students who don't understand why their parents are hurt and crying after being stopped by the police, but they have to comfort them. I have a friend who stopped driving altogether in Bloomington because they were being constantly stopped and harassed by police officers. Our community, especially folks of color, are hurting and will continue to hurt until you all decide to provide an avenue to end their hurting. We cannot afford to delay this vote any further. Delaying this vote means one more of my students will learn the police are not here to protect them and their families, and they will have fear instilled in them by the Bloomington Police Department. One more of my friends will unnecessarily be stopped and searched. One more of your constituents will lose trust in this policing system, and ultimately, you. Is this the type of community you want Bloomington to be? You all have the opportunity and the responsibility right now to make Bloomington better for all. By creating the Public Safety and Community Relations Board, you are acknowledging and addressing the real fear and distrust our community has with the Bloomington Police Department. The PSCRB creates transparency in the investigative procedure, which builds trust in our community. Civilians on the PSCRB will have the ability to recommend policy changes, which allows the community to have a say in how they are being policed. This ultimately leads to a sense of power for the community. I call on you, the City Council, to pass the Public Safety and Community Relations Board now, and with the amendment to allow folks with felony convictions to serve. To end, I will leave you with this quote by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. Thank you.
Okay, Dante Latson and Gene Howard.
Good evening. I want to just say that I appreciate and back the words of Quincy Cummins, who spoke on behalf of the Alliance, and also want to echo a few things that were mentioned, namely Alderwoman Bray offering some additional language. We appreciate that. And I was really taken by Alderwoman Hallman's words about the mistakes that we make and normalizing that, because many of the folks that we're talking about, they didn't have the fortune that many of us have and probably all of you have had, and that is not getting caught. We've all made mistakes, and that's just the reality of it. And so moving forward in your deliberations, there are a few things I just want to offer up, and this is not to slam or to be disrespectful, but to simply offer it up as we move forward. When we're talking about the folks that we're here to discuss, we should be careful about referring to them as them people and those people. Who are we talking about? They're not just them or those people, they're your constituents. So let's be mindful of that. They're full and wholly complicated human beings just like the rest of us. No different. So the other thing is they're not felons. Let's stop that. They're human beings, not felons. A felony is a mistake. That's a record. But that does not explain or describe who they are as a human being. That may seem very simple, but let's take a look at the psychology of it. We know that in our society, when you objectify something and you just turn it into a label, then it's very easy to discard. And that's what we're talking about. We're discarding the people that were here, and the reality is that none of us would even be here if it weren't for the community. So it's not them or those people are felons. They're human beings. So just think about that. Again, just think about it. The other thing is that I've had an opportunity to do some work with Alderman Sage, and I had a good time and thought that he was a fair guy, and had an opportunity to speak with a few people on the west side of the community over the past weekend, and thought about you, and was able to work with them to come up with something where we would love to have you come over and take you out on the west side and talk to the people. So then that way it might clear up some of what you see as maybe a perception, because it's not perception, it's reality. And again, I say that in all fairness and sincerity. So we've got our work cut out for us. Let's not be afraid to do the right thing here. Thank you.
Your time's up. Thank you. Gene Howard, and I think that's going to be it. Gene.
Good evening. I'm Jean Howard, and for many years was a professor of social work at Illinois State University. I come from a town and from parents who told me that when there was trouble, run to the police. The police will protect you. The police are good people, and you need to trust the police. I have friends and colleagues who tell their children something very different about the police. My friends of color have a very different conversation, and often, because of their lived experience, present interactions with the police as potentially dangerous and urge their children to do nothing that might give some message to the police that they pose a danger. I find that sickening. I find that sad that my lived reality is so different from that of so many of my friends and their children who teach their children to be afraid of the people who are here to protect and serve us. It should not be the case that some people in our community have one experience and other people have a very different experience. I'm here to urge you to vote for this commission to be established. I'm also here to remind you that those who are convicted of a felony are often equally disadvantaged by that process. Some of us have done things that probably could have resulted in a felony charge, but because of the color of our skin, the legal representation we could afford, or the opportunities that we had, that situation was treated very differently from others who lacked those resources. So dehumanizing or treating a person as less worthy because they were convicted of a felony does not mean you're getting somebody different necessarily. It means you're getting somebody who had a different opportunity to turn their life in another direction. I'm rehabbing a house on the west side, and I've had conversations with my neighbors and friends. It's in a very diverse block. And again, I'm reminded of how very different their world is from mine in terms of a relationship with authority and particularly with the police. This saddens me greatly. I've lived in this community for over 34 years. And for much of that time, I was in a bubble about what it was like to be here, depending on who you were and what you look like and what resources you have. I urge you to vote for this commission, and I remind you, though, that this is not the answer. This is a beginning step toward the answer. If people come into this at odds, if people come into this doubting and not trusting each other, if people come into this with hardened hearts and don't really use this opportunity, it's just another empty gesture. Let's begin with the commission, and let's make that commission meaningful, and let's involve people who care about our community and want to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, our public comment is closed, and my apologies to those of you who were not able to make it. We now move to discussion of the proposed Public Safety Community Relations Commission, and we have 35 minutes budgeted, so that means we're going to be bleeding into our 7 o'clock meeting. And at this point, we are turning to Police Chief Hefner. And just, Jeff, we are allowed to bleed over into our meeting? Okay. I don't know that we don't need a motion for that, do we, at this point, because we have 35 minutes on here? Yeah. No.
Good evening, council, citizens. It's a pleasure to be in front of you. This is obviously a very sensitive topic, and someone attributed the comments, I think, that were attributed to me as far as saying those people. I want to tell you that I'm not exactly sure if that's the exact verbiage, but I own it. But I want to be the first to tell you that I had an uncle who was a felon. So don't think I think any less of anyone. So let's just be very clear on that. In regards to the citizen complaint process, 3 years ago, when I got here, and before I got hired, people were concerned about complaints and other things. And quite frankly, we weren't handling them the best that we could. We were kind of understaffed, and I came before you to request an assistant chief so I could put them over the Office of Professional Standards that would be over various things like training, our communications center, and be hands-on with the complaint process. We also put a sergeant in there. So we had a process in place to make sure things were not falling through the cracks. You approved that. That's what we've been doing. We even spent $25,000 here not that long ago on getting some software, IA Pro, that helps us track police officers and their activities if they have use of force issues, which you get complaints about that. Rudeness complaints. A lot of complaints come in that are just basically misinterpretations of the law or policies. But even with that, we're trying to do the best that we can, and we will continue to do that. In regards to the process, moving on to that, as you will see, we put this out here. People can come in to the department and obtain a copy of a complaint form. If you do not want to come in to the department to get a complaint form, you can complete it and send it in online. You can have someone else bring it in completed. There are various ways to do that. There's one person who did not want to come into the department to file a complaint. We met them in the library parking lot to do that. We sent a sergeant over. We do all we can to accommodate people. There's a lot of ways out there to investigate complaints. We have video now. We're going to have body-worn cameras. There's a lot of information out there that we can glean, especially when they're filed in a timely manner. The NAACP assists people in filing complaints and have been doing a great job. Not in our town. They have access to our forms. Black Lives Matter, they encourage people. They have our forms. They encourage people, solicit for people to file complaints. All of that is out there. And if someone comes in and they're not aware or familiar with how to fill out the form, we will assist people. We will do whatever we can. Because if there's a problem, we want to address it. Some people ask why the forms have to be notarized. As you see right there, it's in statute that it's required to have a sworn affidavit to be notarized before it can be turned in and investigated. It's turned over to the staff officer, that being a sergeant or a lieutenant or an assistant chief. Part of the reason we put that process in place is because we don't want something dropped off. I mean, we have great officers up front or civilian staff up front, but sometimes things can fall through the cracks. When you're giving it to a sergeant or a lieutenant, not only that, they can notarize it for you for free. You can go other places, but they can do that. But that way it goes into our tracking system. And it's investigated, and it goes up through Assistant Chief Wheeler, who's over the Office of Professional Standards right now. These are the things we have in place. As you see, it's free of cost. Or you can use a notary of your choosing. You can fill out the whole form, come in, just say, I need this notarized. They'll look at it, they'll stamp it, they'll probably look and see to make sure that you've completed the address information correctly and the numbers so we can contact you later. That has to be on there. And yes, it should be turned in, like I said, in person to the staff officer, but like I said, you can mail it in, all right? Another thing that has caused some consternation with people is that on the complaint form, it does say on there that if you file a complaint and you knowingly put false information on there, you know, we could turn it over to the state's attorney's office for possible prosecution. That's on there for a reason. That's on there for a reason. We take complaints seriously, and we deal in facts. We hear a lot of stories. You hear people say things, but in our world, whether it's a complaint, whether it's an investigation, we deal with facts. And if someone is going to go out of their way to do that, then we would consider that. And I'm not talking about somebody having a different viewpoint on something that they said and turned it in. I mean, if you go out of your way to make a complaint against an officer who's out there working hard and doing something, I have an obligation to look at that and consider it. When I used to work with state police, I think in like 5 years that might have happened 3 times, and maybe one person was actually prosecuted. If you think it doesn't happen here, I'll relate a story to you. And this doesn't mean all the time. I'm just telling you. I want to reiterate that. That doesn't mean all the time. I had a person contact me a couple years ago, wanted to speak with me, the mayor, the city manager, to discuss an issue that they said had to be handled correctly, poor for relations between the city and the community. This person associated with an organization. I asked them, I said, hey, why don't you come meet with me? Because I do meet with people even before complaints are filed sometimes. That doesn't stop a person from filing a complaint. But sometimes if there's misinformation and communication issues, it can work out. They did not want that. They demanded to meet with myself and the city manager and our assistant chief at the time. The allegation was that a person, an employee of theirs, had left to go to lunch, I believe, was driving their vehicle and got stopped by one of our officers. They got stopped for a traffic violation, and because their name did not match the insurance card, they were taken to McLean County Jail, where they sat for hours before being released with no charges. I found out the name. I looked at the report when we had the meeting. I showed that person the information they had related to me, and I showed them the report. That person, we did have contact with that person that day. That person was picked up for retail theft at a store, and we took them to McLean County. That was our only contact. It was an amount that was under felony amount, and they were released on a PR bond. Now, you think I'm telling you this because I want to talk about people being untruthful. My point is that what happened after that discussion that I had with that person? Did they go back and tell people that that information was false? Did they say, hey, you were untruthful, and whoever else you told that, this information is false? I highly doubt it. But that's how things go sometimes, and we have to deal with it. And I'm good with dealing with it. But I tell everybody here, when they ask us things, we have to have a process in place because we're going to ask about the facts. You talk to somebody, and they say they filed a complaint, you didn't hear anything, or something went awry, or they didn't know anything, follow up with them and find out what happened. Find out the facts, because that's what we're dealing with. As you'll see here, 30 days is the amount of time we strive to get back to people with a complaint. That's what we try to do. Prior to that, we will contact that person to try to set up a time to interview them. I will tell you right now, for people who might be intimidated for coming to the department, we'll set up interviews at the library. We'll set up interviews over here at City Hall. We will do what we can to make sure we get all the information, because we learn from complaints. We learn from complaints. It gauges how we're doing, okay? We'll try to get back with people with a disposition in 30 days. You have to understand that if it has something to do with a crime, and it's in the legal system, it's probably going to be longer because we can't run 2 investigations at once. It's got to go through the criminal justice system. And when we're looking at it, you're looking at the criminal part, and then you're looking at policy violations. Once we do get back to you, you will receive a letter from us advising you of the disposition of your complaint. And it will tell you on it, we have information on there. It tells you that we will, we appreciate you sending a complaint in. And if you have issues, you can come in and speak with us. And as it stands right now, if you're not satisfied with my decision, you have the city manager and you have the council. And I want to be clear, I respect everybody's ideas, but we have a process. And I don't like when people say the process doesn't work or is broken if it has not been utilized. We have some great organizations in here that can be advocates. I told you the NAACP has been doing that. Advocates for people to get us complaints. We need that information. We need the information in a timely manner. If you don't file a complaint within a timely manner, especially if we have something on video in a vehicle, it's only there for 90 days. Then it's gone. Sometimes there's witnesses that we want to talk to. If you don't file a complaint in a timely manner, people move. People go out of state. That makes it hard to really get to the bottom of what occurred. So please, file this information in a timely manner. You know, I told you that we have a system in place. And we did that shortly after I got here. We take pride in that. You have an assistant chief right here who's worked homicides at the homicides, various level, beyond reproach. We take pride in what we do. Now, people talk about the number of complaints, the low number. Well, 3 years ago we sat at 31. I know we have some business people up here. A year after that we had 30. Now we're at 17. I don't own a business, but I know that if you have a business and your customers are complaining, and I hate to look at us as a business because that's not what we're doing, but I would think it's my job for us to work with people and that complaints would go down because we are actually talking to people. People are talking to the shift supervisors. They're finding out what actually occurred. We're giving information out. People call me. They come in and meet with me. And like I said, you can talk to a shift supervisor. You can talk to me. If you're not satisfied, you still can go ahead and file the complaint. I encourage you to do that. The last thing I would like to say is that you got a little over 120 officers across the street over there. And they work very hard for everyone in this community. And yes, I know some people have different experiences. I don't wear this uniform all the time. I've had different experiences. I know a lot of people talk about experiences. They don't necessarily occur here, but people hear things. They say things. Those 120 people will be there for you no matter what occurs. Shooting incidents, thefts, whatever. They are always there to answer the call. And they will always be there, and they care. These are the same 120 officers that have had crime reduced almost 25% in 3 years. And they're proud of that. And regardless of what you do, we're still going to keep working. Regardless of what is said about us, we're going to work better to improve relations and do what we can. But we're here to work for you as hard as we can. Questions?
Questions of the chief. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. One of the reasons I was interested in having this conversation was to educate myself more about what happens after a complaint form is filed. So you alluded to you have your 30-day investigation and do your intake, and I've heard that at least in prior administrations that people would get a letter that could it might say, we've investigated your case and your complaint is unfounded. And there isn't necessarily information that's related to that. And I guess I'm interested in finding out on the back end of that, what kind of information you do share with people, and then you also said that if people were dissatisfied, they could go and talk with the city manager. So I'm interested in knowing if that's been codified. I'm also interested in your informal process that you talked about, that you invite people to come and sit down with you and you try to reach a resolution. I'm just trying to understand within the whole process how much of this is written, how much of this is your the culture you're trying to instill?
Well, the culture we're trying to instill is communication. To answer your first question, within that 30 days, we will have conducted the investigation. And for us, it's either not sustained, the investigation failed to produce a preponderance of evidence to either prove or disapprove the allegation, exonerated, which means what the officer did was legal, justified, proper, and in conformance with the law and agency policy, or sustained. It produced a preponderance of evidence to prove the employee acted improperly or unfounded. That means it didn't occur at all. So, what I'm saying on the front end is when people come in, there used to be a time when somebody just came in and said, I want to file a complaint. Now, this is what I hear from people who have been here longer than me. They just give them a form and say, okay, go fill it out. Sometimes, and what works best is that, okay, ma'am, you want to file a complaint? Sometimes you know, ma'am or sir, when they come in, is there anything you would like to discuss about it? Maybe we can clear up what occurred. You will be surprised how many times sometimes people can just, not all times, once they hear some other information or once they find out what occurred, and in particularly once they find out what the law is, things go better. They may not always be happy, but they understand it. I always tell people, we do not make the laws. We just enforce the laws. People think we make the laws. We didn't put those laws in there. Those are part of the police officer's Bill of Rights.
So when you get this letter in the mail, is it clear that you have a recourse to appeal to the city manager? Or does it say, I invite you to come in and talk with me about this? I'm just trying to understand what the formalized process is for...
You can request to come in and speak with Assistant Chief Wheeler. And usually when that happens, if somebody's going to come in, then I'm present as well. And then we will sit down and discuss it in more detail and explain what occurred. We're putting more on our letters so people have a better idea in regards to why we arrived at the decision that we did. But even then, if people want to come in and discuss it, they can do that. If they're not satisfied with me, I'll send them to the city manager. Did that?
I guess I'm thinking again about the Citizen Review Board,
Yes.
and this is a process that you've put in place. You're not going to be with us forever. Is this a process that 10 years from now, if you're not here, our police are going to follow? Or I want to see things codified. I want to see everybody have a common understanding.
The process we have now? Well, I work for you. So when I leave, if there's somebody else, this is the process. And if they want to change that, they would go through you or justify it that way.
But that's a written process. What you're telling me is something that I'm glad to hear, but I think I'm hearing people need to know that, what are the steps they can go through after they file the complaint, and where do we go with that?
Well, the letter says you can contact us if you have questions. All the contact information is on there. So that is something that a person can do. And like I said, I get calls. People come in and they just say they want to talk to me. All I ask is that they inform me in advance of what they'd like to discuss, because that way if they come in and they tell me some things, then I have to go and look it up. So that takes 2 meetings. There might be 2 meetings anyway, so I can be prepared and find out what occurred.
And Mayor, if I may, just digress a little bit for half a minute here. People are wondering why we're having this conversation again. This is not our billionth conversation. This is our second conversation. And you did a lot of heavy lifting in your house with 5 groups and came to an understanding, and now I feel like we need to be able to do that too. I learned a lot from my colleagues at our last conversation. I'm learning a lot tonight. And I think we need to honor this so that we have the very best agreement that we can have for our community.
Actually, I think we've been talking about it for about 6 months or so, but actually I thought I was telling you since February, Anyway, and I thought I was talking to Maria off the record. I should have made that clear. I didn't. But anyway, Joni and then Boca.
Hi.
Johnny, excuse me.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing to come up to professional standards, and how does that align with what Normal has done?
Trying to figure out, what are you talking about? Like accreditation?
Yes. Yes.
We plan on starting that before the end of the year. We're planning on going through Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. So you kind of have to go through all of your policies, and then there's some new policies. We're in the preparation stages of that now, and then they will come in.
Okay, what does Normal do? Because I keep...
They have CALIA.
And what is that?
That's just another accreditation process through another organization.
Through the state, or is that national?
It's a national one.
Okay.
They also hire a civilian to actually run that. I was with state police. There's like 15 people that you had to have all the time. I've looked at iLeap. We can do the same thing. This is the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, and we will be on the same level.
Okay.
And a lot of these things, this complaint process that we have, all this is pretty much across the board with everyone. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that online, this is in Spanish. You can get it in Spanish. And we also, we had meetings previously when I just gotten here, the NAACP. We modified the form a little bit. I actually had a couple meetings with Black Lives Matter, and we modified it again here recently. So, you know, we meet and work with people or come to a halfway point.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Nwambwe.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions, but I'm going to start with the first one first, so don't interrupt me. So, Brandon, I know you. You know, we know each other fairly well. You're a great guy. I know a lot of your leadership team. You know, great guys as well. I've gotten to know them. What I'm wondering, though, I mean, because I know you and I have a relationship with you and, you know, your leadership team, I would feel comfortable coming to you about an issue. But for some, it may not be as comfortable because there might be, justified or not, the fear of retaliation. So how do you manage that? And I'm not saying that you would retaliate, but I'm talking about the fear that just because you bring up a complaint that there might be a fear of retaliation.
Well, you know, we kind of talked about that before. And first of all, when I was allowed to have the assistant chief, one reason we did that is so we had better span of control down our various divisions, so we would know our supervisors better. But I would say to anyone, I've said it before, no one has ever been harmed or hurt. You have these good organizations. If you're uncomfortable coming in by yourself, you want to talk with somebody, bring somebody with you. The NAACP has done that numerous times if you're not comfortable. If you truly have, if you're one of these organizations and you have people who have complaints or want to talk about something, come with them. That door is always open. And I think sometimes, you know, we have our officers out doing things. We have neighborhood walks and other things. They weren't necessarily doing that before. I had to get them out their comfort zone. I implore other people to get out their comfort zones, to come and do some things and work with us, as opposed to, you know, there's a lot of negativity going on. But try it. That's what I would say. Don't say it doesn't work, or don't say we are not big enough to be retaliation. If something like that's going on, that is going to be easy to discern. We got 80,000, but we are not that big. And if something like that were going on, or they thought that, if somebody came to me and made an allegation like that, we might look at it briefly, or I might turn it over to the state police, because we want things done right. if we thought it was valid. Because we don't want that. I truly feel we're suffering and we get brought under the same brush as what's going on in other places. My concern is here. So if that answers your question, all I can say is get out your comfort zone, file a complaint, see how it is, or come in and talk to me. We'll do whatever. If you want to meet at the library, I'll meet you at the library, or I'll meet you over here at City Hall. Your second question?
Second question, so we had discussion about the felony aspect of the proposal here, and I know it's been suggested that if somebody had a felony, they could wait for 7 years. After 7 years, they could be on the board. I guess my question is, I think, I'd like to get at, and I've looked it up myself, to see there's different classes of felonies, right? Isn't that 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Class X?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
For Illinois?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but I kind of wanted people to get a sense of what those are, because sometimes we use the word felony, but
Well,
we
it
don't.
depends on, what degree. You sell a certain amount of dope, you could be a 4 or 3 Class X. That's 6 to, don't get me all the years right, but that determines the amount of time that you are, you serve or on probation. So, I guess my only, real response to that is I've heard some different things about the felony. And as I told you before, I had an uncle. My uncle went to DOC. Okay? I went to visit him. My father took me to visit him in Joliet. And I learned a lot. I loved him a lot. But, a felony is a felony. And I always tell people we're trying to differentiate between what you could have done or whatever. There's people around here who've not done anything wrong, and they have went and got their record sealed. State's Attorney Chambers has been very good about that. People have had their records expunged. They've been very good about that. The only other thing I will tell people that they forget, I've worked in the narcotics game a long time, sometimes charges are thrown out. When you're talking about violent, gun charge might get left off. A person will take another charge. But I think the one thing that kind of hits home to me is, if you go across the street there and talk to some of our detectives, talk to some of these people who have been the victims of identity theft or credit card fraud, or some of our elderly people who have spent thousands of dollars to have some tar put on their driveway. Ask them how they feel, because that's what they ask me, and I feel for them. So that's how I look at it. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but it is what it is. And as far as, I think it was well documented in the paper, as far as law enforcement being on there. I think one thing people are forgetting, I had said, if you were going to let somebody on there that was a felon, I don't have to do whatever you all say anyways. I think you'd be remiss if you excluded someone from law enforcement, because the same reason you don't want someone from law enforcement is the same reason that they wouldn't want a felon. However, a person from law enforcement might be able to tell you that Brendan is not exactly telling you the right thing, because that can be done another way. There's things you could glean from that. So that's kind of my stance on it. We talked about the 7 years. Is it 7 years from the date of conviction? 7 years from getting off parole? I don't know. There's a lot of things, but I know we have a lot of people in our community, almost 80,000. I'm sure we can find enough people across all ethnicities to serve on that board if you decide to go that way without felonies.
Thank you.
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. And Chief, I wanted to say thanks for your presentation, and also thanks to the folks who came out and shared tonight too. I'm going to highlight just a couple of things. I want to echo something that Karen said, because I will tell you that I learned information tonight that I hadn't previously known in terms of a more detailed review of the complaint process. that we've not done that before publicly, I don't believe. And so thanks for explaining how that works. Issues where state law comes into play and so forth. And I also wanted to say thanks for, I think you shared a page and a half with us of additional outreach, community and educational outreach that the Bloomington Police Department does. That, I mean, we hear about it off and on through presentations throughout the year, but to see it consolidated in one place like this, I count up, outside of the alliance groups that are referenced here, maybe close to 3 dozen other access points that I wasn't necessarily aware. I mean, these potentially could be access points for folks who want to file complaints. And I'll be brief, but I'm going to again highlight a couple things, and then I'll have comments when we vote. I assume when we vote on this later. But again, I've asked several times what the problems with the current process are. I've asked that publicly. I've asked that in some private meetings. And what I've heard is we have concerns about being able to access the complaint process. And I've asked, is there anything else? And again, I can't really hear anything. I've not been told anything specifically beyond the access points. So I hear you again say, I'm willing to work with the alliance groups, with the potentially, again, maybe some of these other activities and touch points that the police department has here. And so, which leads me then to my next point. If I'm, again, reading the proposed ordinance, and we just got yet another version of it, I think late this afternoon. If I'm reading section 6 correctly, it says, if a complainant is not satisfied with the determination of the police chief at the conclusion of the internal investigation, the complainant may make a request for review by the PSCRB within 30 days from the date of receipt of the police department's findings. So I ask myself, if the issue is, if the issue that I've heard repeatedly is about people are reluctant or hesitant to access the complaint process, I'm trying to understand how then a board that does not engage in the process until clear at the end, potentially, how that addresses any issues related to accessing the process. To me, those seem disconnected. And so I would come back to the point I've said publicly before, is from my perspective, I find this to be a solution looking for a problem. And especially when as we've heard highlighted tonight, we had the 17 complaints, and I think about that in relationship to, I would imagine, are the tens of thousands of interactions that our police department has with the people of Bloomington in a given year. That suggests to me such a minuscule percentage. I mean, something with several decimal points, to the right of that. That again, I'm still having trouble, and have concluded then, as I said before, that this is a solution looking for a problem. And so I look forward to more conversation that we have, and as we move towards a vote, apparently at the next council meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to be clear. There's none of us in here in uniform who investigate things. If something is wrong, we want it fixed, because we know the bad shadow it puts on law enforcement and other agencies, because it's obviously we get blowback from it. So if somebody's doing wrong, we want to address it first and foremost.
Okay. Actually, you get the last word.
So I have a quick question, and it's in regards to the ordinance as proposed. Has 2 sections, Section 4 and Section 5. One talks about, Section 4 is training and orientation, and it charges the city legal department and the police department with developing written standards for orientation and continuing education for all the board members. And then Section 5 talks about the rules and procedure, and again, the board is created with rules and procedures based on the review and assistance of the legal department and the police department to establish these rules and procedures. So when we think about training and orientation and establishing rules and procedures and the involvement of the police, I'd like to know, are there obstacles with involving felons in that process? So for instance, are you able to show your police procedures and protocols to all persons who would be on the board, even if they were persons who had felony convictions? Do you know of any legal obstacles to showing police protocol or doing a ride-along and having a person in a police car who has been convicted of a felony? Is there anything?
We currently do not permit people with felonies to do ride-alongs. And there are, we obviously don't know what kind of training would be engaged, but, these are questions that would have to be answered after it was done. But there are some, obviously some legal issues that would definitely have to work out. This would not be something done overnight, because people would need to be trained in policies and procedures and things of this nature. So that's the only answer I could give you.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I think that points out some things for us to further consider, that as we go forward to craft an ordinance, if we go that direction that meets the needs of our community, that passing something that isn't complete, that won't serve us well, in my humble opinion. So thank you, Chief, for your presentation this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, it's going to have to be quick because we're well out of time.
It is. I think the question would be for Jeff, and wouldn't our policies and procedures for this board be public?
Yes.
Yeah, so okay. It sounded like Alderman Bray's question would be that that the policies and procedures wouldn't be public, but they would be.
Thank you for that, but we can talk, I guess, more about this. You're going a different direction. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Chief Wheeler. And we really appreciate everything. Thank you. At this point, just before we adjourn, if there are other moving parts as we actually bring this to a vote at our next scheduled meeting, if there are other things that we need to discuss first, then let's make sure that those are addressed before we move forward, and Mr. Hales and I will be talking about that as we go forward here. Now we're going to have to, we're late, but can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting so we can begin our regularly scheduled meeting shortly?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman, I was going to say Schmidt.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Black, second by Alderwoman Howman. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, we will convene after 3 minutes of a bathroom break. Thank you.